Death, the final destination, the Reaper, being not alive, being dead. Death is our common enemy. It is the one thing that unites us all across the human species beyond any other border or distinction that you want to make. Every single person will die, except for me because I made all those virgin sacrifices in college, but honestly, we're not here to get into my dealings with the occult. We're here to talk about the death penalty because it's been brought up in recent discussion. Now, over the course of the many years that I've been on YouTube, I've done quite a number of videos on specific death penalty cases, which I went into the case details in depth in order to give you perspective on the guilt or innocence of the party that we were talking about. Now, typically the reason I frame these videos this way is because there were people trying to get a person out of jail claiming they're innocent based on misleading information like leaving out evidence, sometimes misrepresenting evidence, and sometimes outright fabricating evidence that did not exist throughout the course of the case. And this was all done despite the fact that through the many appeals of whatever person these combination of people are trying to get out of jail off death row was found to be more guilty. There was actually more evidence discovered through the appeal process proving that they did in fact do the crime. However, I never really answer the philosophical or fundamental question, which is what my position is on the death penalty. And the reason I didn't answer that question is because it wasn't really related to the guilt or innocence of the specific person that I was talking about, and it's not a very interesting question for me to answer. Right now, presently, we have an imperfect system. Sometimes, not the cases that are highlighted by Kim Kardashian, the Young Turks, or the far left, we convict the wrong people for crimes, and when you have the death penalty, we end up executing the wrong person for a crime. And as long as our system is imperfect, I am perfectly willing to not execute people I know are guilty in order to avoid executing an innocent person by mistake. To me, this is the only sensible position to have on the death penalty as of right now. It's an interesting philosophical debate once you get beyond that point, but until you can be assured that everybody that is on death row and is set to be executed is definitely guilty, you can't really move on in a policy stage to that phase in my mind. That being said, even if we did know for sure that all of the people, or at least the specific person that we were talking about, was guilty of the crime that they were charged and convicted of, I still have reservations about vesting that level of state power in the government to make those decisions. And if you don't believe that the government is the one that makes those decisions, Lauren Chen, one of my favorite people on the platform, has an excellent video where she lays out that, of course, even though you have 12 jurors decide at the end of the process whether or not to impose the death penalty decisions, all of the key ones, are made well prior to that point when that is brought to the jury.
I said to those saying it's not the state that decides, it's a jury of peers, whether a crime is eligible for the death penalty, who gets charged, what judge is appointed, and how the appeals process happens are all determined by the state. And I would say to that as well, even if that weren't the case, I still do not believe that, a jury of your peers should have any more control over your life, right? I mean, I think that's not something that I would want a group of random people, even if they are my peers, to be able to decide.
She is 100% right on that, of course, and we can pretend that the jury of uninformed people pulled from the citizenry are ultimately making the final call, but that's just not the case. Also, one of the things that you'll notice when you go through the list of people that are on death row is that often there's an enhancement charge of kidnapping related to a lot of death row cases. Now, kidnapping can range from what you and I think of when we think of kidnapping, all the way down to when somebody goes into a place and orders another person at gunpoint or due to threats of violence to the other side of the room. That's how broad that is. So whether or not you think kidnapping based on the image you have in your mind as an enhancement for a death penalty charge makes sense, should be weighted against the actual practical reality of using kidnapping in the way that our governments do use it when it relates to death penalty cases. Now again, that philosophical question is not something that I'm going to be answering for you throughout the course of this video. What I want to talk about is the reason that we're talking about the death penalty, and a lot of it can be boiled down by this image alone. This is the group of people that the news has been talking about that President Trump has slated for executions during the lame duck era of his presidency. Now, if you can't see the obvious angle that's being taken here based on these photos alone, then clearly you're not paying attention to the way our society currently operates and how absolutely obsessed we are with race in this nation. I was talking this over with Devin Tracy of Atheism is Unstoppable, somebody who got an unprecedented death penalty from YouTube for his channel and is now over at Censor TV. Use promo code AIU to get 20% off and make sure that your revenue actually supports Devin, by the way. And we were laughing at this CNN article where they break down all of the people that are on death row. And the first thing highlighted in this CNN article, as is highlighted in almost every news story featuring this group of people, is the race of the people. Seriously, look at the text of the article. Every single person gets a black man after their name, as if that's the most important factor, as if that is what is determining whether or not they are on death row. And it was really funny because they had one white woman in there, so they had to throw in that she was a white woman almost to fit the mold of the rest of the article, even though we all know that other than the fanfare of the US federal government executing a woman for the first time in 70 years, when this woman is executed in the lead up and the follow up to that execution, nobody's gonna care. It's not gonna make breaking news. The Young Turks aren't gonna do featured stories about her and about how her appeals were denied, or about how Trump is truly evil for setting up and scheduling her execution. That's only reserved for people that match a certain description that can help you push a certain narrative. And the reason I know that to be true is because it already happened. You see, I'm a bit more curious than your average person that works in the media or is on YouTube just reacting to random stuff that they're seeing in front of their face. What I like to do is look into what I'm not being shown, the information that's being neglected. And when I see this group of 5 people and I'm told that the Trump administration has brought back executions and they're killing these people and look how racially disproportionate it is, I think, wait a minute. Are these the only people that the Trump administration has on death row that they're planning on killing? Because remember, federal executions in this country have been suspended since 2003. That is 17 long years without an execution. And the federal government has still been convicting people of death penalty level cases during that time. So the Trump administration should be swamped with cases to choose from, and these are the only 5 that he decided to bring back the death penalty with? Seems a little bit strange. Well, actually, it's not a little bit strange, you see, because what the media decided to do was cut off at this point arbitrarily so you don't see the actual slate of people that the Trump administration executed during his term or plans on executing during his term. You see, federal executions in this country actually resumed in July of this year, not recently. And in fact, in July, there was a slate of people that were on death row that the Trump administration immediately pushed to execute, and all of these people were in fact executed. And I'm going to go over some of their names and faces, not the grisly details of their case, but just to prove a point about what you're not being shown by the mainstream media. This is Daniel Lewis Lee, the first person the Trump administration decided to resume executions with, who was executed July 14th, in the year 2020. Now, to be clear, Lee did it. I'm not trying to argue that he's innocent or any of his appeals are legitimate, and based on the charges that Lee faced, I understand completely why the Trump administration decided to start with this person in terms of executions. Up next is Wesley Perky, executed 7/16/2020. Now again, just like Lee, Perky definitely did it. However, unlike Lee, Perky had some appeals that actually looked interesting if you wanted to play up the sympathy card in order to get him out of prison. He was claiming that he was mentally unfit for the execution, that he had a diagnosis of dementia, and therefore it would be cruel and unusual to execute this person for a crime that he doesn't have the mental capacity anymore to understand committing. Now again, I'm not arguing the case, I'm just pointing out that there was a case and you likely never heard of this case because it doesn't fit the right narrative for the media in order to push it. The dementia claim is just as valid, if not more valid, than the Brendan Bernard claims that he was remorseful, therefore he didn't do it, according to people with no information, but in reality, they were just asking for a commutation. If you were going to grade commutation claims, actually not having the mental capacity to understand your crime anymore ranks higher amongst you feeling bad about it later. Then there was Lesmond Mitchell, who was executed on 8/26/2020, who was a member of the Navajo Nation, and of all the cases, because I'm interested in legal theory, this one is actually the most interesting to me because depending on the treaties that the United States government would have with the Navajo Nation, this execution could actually bring up troubling implications with our agreements with certain tribes. But again, even with that interesting legal question, there was very little attention brought to this case. Then there was Keith Dwayne Nelson, who was put to death 8/28/2020, and based on his photo at the time, I think they were going with the mentally not competent enough in order to understand the crime he committed at his appeal. Then there was William Emmett LaCroix Jr., who was executed on 9/22/2020, who claimed that witchcraft was the thing that was responsible for driving him to commit the crime that he ultimately ended up getting the death penalty for. Now, needless to say, we're dealing with an insanity or temporary insanity or mentally incompetent to understand the charges upon appeal kind of thing. Now, except for Christopher Villalba, who was Brendan Bernard's accomplice, these are all of the people who Trump executed prior to the 5 that you keep seeing consistently that were scheduled for execution. Now again, I'm not arguing that any of these people are innocent or deserve to be spared the death penalty or anything like that. I'm just pointing out that you've never seen a split image like this in the same way that you probably likely saw this split image multiple times. And the theory on why these people were organized in this way by the Trump administration is due to the influence that Black Lives Matter had on our policy. So Trump essentially stacked the first set of executions with majority white people because he knew that that wouldn't get any negative political attention in the same way that executing a black person in the follow-up of George Floyd would have gotten. And truth be told, he was 100% right. There were not massive campaigns endorsed by celebrities in order to get commutations for any of the people on this list before Villalba. But right here, there is. It's the only reason I'm talking about it because I didn't hear about these other executions until I decided to delve more into what I was being told about this set of executions. And this has serious implications. Remember, if they stacked the executions this way for the reasons that are speculated, and I will grant that it is speculation, then that means these people had less of a chance of living, even though they were all sentenced to death, just based on the timetable of when the next president might potentially be sworn in. Let's say in every single one of these death penalty cases, for some weird procedural reason, a judge decided to issue a 60-day injunction. Basically, the government has to wait 60 days before they decide to execute them. This could be to review new evidence, to analyze more thoroughly an appeal. Nonsense like this happens all the time. There are delays in death penalty cases constantly. If that were to happen, and after the 60 days they were okay to do the execution, almost all of these people with just a 60-day extension would make it past the day that Joe Biden is due to be sworn into office as the next president. Joe Biden, who pledged to resume the suspension of the federal death penalty, sparing each and every one of these people's lives, more or less. I think one person is just before the deadline on the timetable that I laid out, but almost all of these people would be alive. Now look, obviously that didn't happen, and a bunch of people from the list of people that the mainstream media thinks that you should actually care about are getting the death penalty have already been executed. But I think it's really interesting how an obvious instance of race-based discrimination that literally had potentially life or death causes was just allowed to pass through under the radar without getting any attention from the media. Just imagine for a second what would have happened if President Trump, out of fear of blowback from a group of largely white people who were destroying cities at the time, decided to stack the executions the other way. How crazy the media would have went pointing this out. But hey, those are just my thoughts, but I'd actually really like to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. I'd like to hear if you knew about the cases that the Trump administration started up with the death penalty again all the way back in July, or you, like many people, just assumed that this all started up in the lame duck session with the group of people that are being constantly pushed on you by the mainstream media. If you like this video, then please show me by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social medias, you can support me via the support links in the description box. This has been me talking about what you're not seeing when we talk about the death penalty. Till next time.